and they left, and I thought, I really want to feel condescending towards these boys, and I really want to laugh at their story because it's so absurd. But, I sort of had to admit that if somebody came to my door and said, we believe that, 2,000 years ago, this 14-year-old virgin girl was impregnated by God, and the fact that she's a virgin is maniacally important to us, and she had this baby, and he was the Son of God, and he walked on water and did all these miracles, and if you believe in him, you'll have everlasting life, I would think that would be equally ridiculous. It's just that I'm used to that story. So I felt like I wouldn't let myself go there to be condescending about them when I accepted this other story. Okay, so my religious history in a nutshell. Obviously, I was raised Catholic, and for me, it was actually a fantastic experience. I was sort of enamored with the romance of the Catholic Church from a young age. I loved going to Catholic school. I always felt superior. I loved the nuns and the priests. I became sort of a nunophile when I was in 8th grade and watched all the Haley Mills, nun movies, and I sort of fancied myself a young Haley Mills, and I would go around saying, "I've got the most scathingly brilliant idea." And I totally wanted to be a nun. And I remember Sister Antonella was this nun who taught me debate in high school. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and she would invite me to the convent to have dinner, and the convent just seemed like heaven to me. I mean, there was classical music playing, and there was philosophical debate at dinner, or what I thought was philosophical debate. At least it wasn't people screaming or not showing up for dinner. And to me, it was just like this little bit of heaven. And I remember going to Sister Antonella and saying, I feel, I want to be a nun. And she said, well, we really don't accept girls your age, to come into the convent, but I can arrange for you to go and spend a weekend with some nuns to see if you like it. And she sent me off to this sort of, new agey convent where the nuns didn't wear a habit, and they just wore jeans and, flannel shirts and played guitar and sang Kumbaya. And I wasn't into any of that kind of new age, Catholicism. I wanted to shave my head, and I wanted to wear a habit and flog myself and prostrate myself before the cross, and I wanted to do the offices of the day. I wanted it all. And that wasn't in vogue then. So I said I really wasn't interested in being that kind of nun. And I wanted the little cell, and anyway, I love the whole thing. And also there was the boy problem, obviously. I was always really attracted to boys, and I had this huge Jesus poster in my room, and he had this sort of blonde, he sort of looked like Brad Pitt a little bit. He sort of had this blonde hair, and he had this kind of 3-day growth, and he was sort of looking at you like, I understand. And oh my God, that Jesus was so hot. And in fact, I will admit to you that that Jesus helped me discover the pleasures of my own body. But anyway, oh Jesus, he is so there for me. Okay, so my friends and I used to go to all the Catholic churches and rate the Jesuses by how hot they were. I was like, the St. Augustine's Jesus is so muscly. Oh, look at that waistline. Anyway, so the Mormon boys leave, and I think, okay, I had sort of, I was going to Mass occasionally. I hadn't really committed myself to a church. But I thought, I'm going to rededicate myself to my church. I love being a Catholic. I don't think that's the only way to know God. I think there's many ways to know God, but that's my birth culture, and I love it anyway, so I'm going to recommit. And I went around Los Angeles to a bunch of different churches, and I ended up at St. Monica's in Santa Monica, and, it was a very liberal, church, and I loved the singing, and I loved everything about it, and I thought, it's time for me to read this Bible everybody's been talking about. So I signed up for Bible study. Now, the Catholics don't really encourage, the reading of the Bible. Their attitude is sort of, leave that book to the professionals. You just go about your life, and we will show you a few passages here and there. But, they don't really encourage, other Christian denominations, the actual reading of the Bible. So I took, this Bible study class. So for 6 months, every Thursday, I went to St. Monica's. And, we started out with the Old Testament, and I really loved that the Bible started with 2 contradictory stories of, of the creation. One where God creates Adam and Eve together, and then one where God creates Adam and then out of his rib Eve, and I kept thinking, God, all these people who believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, or that every single word of the Bible is true, can't have read even the first 2 chapters of the Bible. I mean, it's so clear that God's trying to say many ways to take things. So I was glad about that. And then, we got into Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all those crazy, laws, and I kept trying, I kept thinking, okay, well, this is of a different time, and we learned, how, if, these great laws from the Old Testament, like if you're a woman and you're menstruating and you go outside, you should be killed. Or there's one where if you're a man, if you have sex with one of your farm animals, both the man and the farm animal should be killed, which I can almost understand for the man. But I mean, the farm animal, after, anyway. And then you're just going to be killed. But then I kept thinking, okay, it's the Old Testament. Old is in the title. It's old. We're getting to a newer Testament. So I couldn't wait till we got to the New Testament. And then the New Testament was just difficult too. I mean, definitely there was more of the message of, love thy neighbor, but, Jesus seemed to be really in need of an antidepressant. He seems to really, get angry, a lot of anger out of Jesus, a lot of leave your family, who cares about your family? I'm thinking, how could you get the family values movement from the Bible? Every time Jesus speaks, he's telling you to leave everything behind and forget about what your parents say. And then we got to the end, and then there was the resurrection, and I thought, the resurrection doesn't really, it's hard for me to wrap myself around it. It seems like it seems like God's saying, okay, if you don't believe he's my son now, here's the ultimate magic trick. I'm gonna raise him from the dead. Only about 5 or 6 people will see it, and he won't even stay around that long after he died. And I could actually cure all illness in the world, but instead I'm gonna raise from the dead my son for 5 days, and he'll be a little deranged, and then just go away. So I thought, okay, so the resurrection isn't that important to me. It's really the tradition of the church. So I kept going to Mass, and it just, I kept thinking, well, it's just so hard for me to sort of check my intellect at the door and sit through this Mass. It's really, I've committed the sin of learning too much about this church. I'm thinking about the historical perspective of it. And then I read this book called The History of God by Karen Armstrong. And she's this fantastic a religious writer, and she's a monotheist herself. And in the book, she says something like, the stories of the Bible or of any religious tradition aren't true. They're obviously not true. People don't really think they're true, and it's not important that they're true. What's important is that they're psychologically true. And that was this big light went off. I was like, oh, they just have to be psychologically true. Oh, that's such a relief. And then I kept thinking, all those nuns and priests, and I kept raising my hand saying, do you really think he walked on water? I mean, really? I could just see that in their eyes, they were looking at me like, don't you know it just has to be psychologically true? So I felt like I was in on the joke. Okay. And then I thought, okay, now I can embrace my church. And then I kept going to Mass, and I thinking, I do like the parts that are psychologically true, death and rebirth and struggle. But, there's a lot of other things that are psychologically true too. I mean, why aren't we hearing stories of Persephone going down into the underworld, or Darth Vader, or the little engine that could? All psychologically true stories.